Hi, I'm Rich.
And I'm Tina.
And if there's one thing we've learned in over 20 years of marriage,
Some days you'll feel like killing your husband.
and some days you'll feel like killing your wife.
Welcome to Love, Marry, Kill.
Hey, babe.
Oh, hey, Rich.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. I'm sorry for calling you babe. It's been an ongoing joke.
Yes, because I read somewhere that younger people don't say honey to their spouse. They say babe.
Yeah.
And so we jokingly, just to make our kids cringe, have been calling each other babe lately. And it just sounds so unnatural to me. And I don't really understand it either because it's like baby. It's like, you're not my baby.
It is a little weird, but we've been doing this jokingly for long enough now that it's going to start sounding natural to us, and then it's going to become...
Oh, no, not for me.
No, you don't think so?
No, I don't think so.
Probably not.
So where are we on the marriage meter today? Do you feel like killing me, or where am I?
No, we're pretty far on the other extreme of the marriage meter.
Yeah, you and got me a nice deli sandwich for lunch, which was very sweet.
As I do that so that I stay on that side of the marriage meter also.
Well, it made me sleepy though.
Oh,
I feel like I'm having some, turkey after effects.
Oh.
But I'm going to perk up here.
Well, you are going to want to be perked up for part 2 of this case. It's a crazy one.
Okay.
Well, we finished off the first day of March Madness, and our whole family did a bracket.
Well, we're recording on Friday, March 21st at 3:12 p.m.
Right,
so yeah, round 1.
And you are in the lead in our family.
Shockingly, I'm in the lead. I'm sure I won't be for long.
Well, you never know.
Do you have Michigan? Did you have Michigan winning last night? Because Michigan did win last night.
Yeah, I have Michigan winning, I think, the next round also.
I have them to the semifinal, I think.
Yeah.
So what happened was, like, my bracket, I wear contacts 99% of the time. This time of year, like, allergies are really ramping up, and if you're a contact wearer, you know that your contacts it's just kind of it's a battle. And sometimes I wear daily contact lenses, which I really love, but sometimes I get like a little mascara on them, and it's really annoying, and I can't see well the rest of the day.
What is the point of this story, Tina?
So when I was doing my bracket, I thought it said like Drake was number 1, but they were actually number 11. So
you got them going all the way.
I have them going all the way. So
I saw your bracket.
It'll be just like a Cinderella story. But they
did win the first round.
They did win what? Yeah.
It was an upset. It cracked me up. I saw your bracket. I was like, Drake.
Maybe I just have a really good intuition.
I mean, if Drake did happen to win the tournament, that would be amazing.
Well, I would still only win $40, so,
Still better than a sharp stick in the eye.
Well, who do you have?
I have Duke going all the way.
Yeah, that's probably more likely. But anyway,
hey,
hope you filled out a bracket. Hope your bracket
happen.
is going well and you all win $1 billion. Did you bring me a snack?
I did bring you a snack.
Did you bring me the oatmeal raisin cookies I made this week?
No, I didn't bring you that. I actually have... Oh, did you have something
Well,
to say
I was
about
just going to
those?
comment how this week, I don't normally do this, but I made oatmeal raisin cookies because they're one of my favorites.
Yeah.
No one else wants them. And I even put nuts in them. So so you didn't bring those.
No, I didn't bring those.
Have you even had one of those?
No, I haven't.
That's really funny. For Rich to resist a homemade cookie, even an oatmeal cookie, it's a little rare.
I'm just not a big fan of
So what'd you
raisins.
bring me? I saw the powdered sugar was out of place in the pantry.
You're like a detective. No, I did not make you anything with powdered
Oh,
sugar.
you didn't?
No,
Well, the powdered sugar was definitely out of place.
I actually have a snack that one of our kind listeners sent us.
Oh, okay.
So I stopped by our post office box and our listener, Emily, who is a fellow Michigander, she's from Plymouth, Michigan.
Oh, Plymouth is a great town.
It's a beautiful town. She sent us a really nice thing. So not only did she include a snack, but she sent us socks also.
Really?
Yeah, so she sent us these lovely socks that say true crime on them, and they've got like heart with they're really cute. So
Emily, that was so kind of you. Thank you.
and then she also sent us these Sanders milk chocolate sea salt caramels.
We love those. We love Sanders.
We do love those, of course.
And if you're out of state, like Sanders is here in Michigan, but I think they've branched out quite a bit. You can find them in a lot of places. Your sister sends me pictures all the time because they love Sanders too, and they're in California. And you can find their stuff everywhere, but it's really good chocolate.
And if
caramel.
you can find their bumpy bumpy cake is really is really awesome. So yeah, so thanks so much, Emily. That was so nice of you to send this to us, and
Yeah.
we will enjoy some sea salt caramels.
Well, I can tell you already, that's a 11 out of 10. Love
Yeah,
them.
for sure. Well, let's take a little break and have one. As expected, those were amazing.
They're really good. They're a favorite around here for sure.
Yeah, thanks again, Emily, so much.
And Sanders has a lot of great Easter treats. Go to sanderscandy.com, SANDERS candy.com. They have a lot of special things for Easter. They always have a lot of good holiday treats. Our kids recently told me that the chocolate bunnies that I always put in their Easter baskets, they don't like them because they feel creepy eating something that has a face and eyes.
I can understand that.
I guess so.
Well, should we get back to our story?
We definitely should.
All right. Would you like to give us a recap of what we heard in part one?
Sure. In part one, we were introduced to Major Christian Kit Martin. He and his second wife, Joan, had a huge fight in September 2012, which led to Joan making claims that Kit had abused her and her children. In an emergency protective order hearing, a judge found in Kit's favor. Joan had a history of making up stories, and she had apparently coached her children to say that they had seen Kit hit her. According to Kit and his daughter Mackenzie, Joan had promised to ruin Kit and his military career when he asked her for a divorce, and reported a number of allegations against Kit, including sexual assault, abuse, and molestation of her children. And she accused Kit of being a spy, in addition to finding some apparently classified materials that Kit had in his possession. This all resulted in a court-martial hearing. One of the witnesses in that court-martial hearing was going to be his neighbor, Calvin Phillips. Calvin was close to Joan. Word around town was that they were having an affair, and he was apparently with her when they found the classified materials. 2 weeks before the scheduled court-martial trial, Calvin and his wife Pam and their next-door neighbor, Ed Dansereau, were all killed. So if you haven't listened to part one, go back and listen to part one.
Well, before we go on with the story, I wanted to do a quick recap of the timeline and think about like the most likely sequence of events that happened in this
it was a
triple
little
homicide.
complicated.
Yeah, it was really complicated, and it was, different events happened throughout the course of the day. So Calvin Phillips, who was 58, was likely killed on the morning of November 18th. The time window that he must have been killed was fairly narrow because Pam left for work around 6:30 a.m., and by 10:40 a.m., delivery truck drivers arrived to find no sign of him. His body was eventually found at the bottom of the cellar stairs. He was wearing a raincoat with the hood tightly cinched, suggesting that he was killed outside because it was raining that morning. And then he was possibly dragged to the back porch using a blue tarp. His body was then dumped into the cellar, which is interesting because the cellar was almost hidden. Like, it's not something that you would have obviously seen that there was a cellar. So that makes us believe that only a person familiar with the house would have known that there was a cellar there and to have dumped his body down there. His wife, Pamela Phillips, who was 53 at the time of her death, was likely attacked that evening while on the phone with their friend Marlene LaRocque at 5:30 p.m. She had called Marlene when she got home, and something startled her when she was on the phone, and the line went dead. Marlene never heard another word from her. The evidence suggested that there was a struggle in the kitchen. There was a clump of Pam's hair found there, and a trail of blood led from the kitchen toward the back door. So it appeared that she may have been dragged through the kitchen. Ed Dansereau, their next-door neighbor, was 63 when he died. He may have seen something that evening, something that made him grab his gun and rush out. He had been in the middle of making dinner, but something outside caught his attention. His abandoned fish fillet on the counter, his open door, and his missing gun all pointed to a single terrifying moment when he made a decision to intervene, and he never returned to his house. His cell phone and his gun were later found in the yard, not far from bloodstains in the grass, so he had likely been ambushed and killed near the driveway, probably moments after Pam was killed. And then came the final act, which was just before 2 a.m. The killer, or maybe killers, returned. Pam and Ed's body were loaded into her car. The vehicle was driven 2 miles out to Rosetown Road, doused in kerosene and set on fire. But then the question is, how did the killer get back? Did they walk back? But that's where Ed's abandoned car may come into play. So Ed's car was discovered a few blocks away from their home. It was positioned near a highway out of town, so it seemed likely that maybe two people were involved. Moving multiple bodies and vehicles might have been difficult for just one person. So perhaps one of the killers had driven Ed's car to Rosetown Road where they left Pam's car, then used it to return back to near the Phillips house and left the car there. So it's very confusing.
So they would still have needed a getaway car. So that's,
Yeah.
maybe they didn't want to leave any evidence in their own car.
Yeah, maybe.
So that's why they used Ed's car.
Yeah, I think trying to interpret like the crime scene and the why the killer or killers did what they did is really baffling. Like, why did they leave Calvin's body at the house? Why did they move Ed's car? So yeah, we just don't know.
So where do you think Pam's body was between the time that she was murdered until the time that she was taken out of town?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, because she was killed at 5:30, Ed was probably killed right around that time as well, but then they weren't moved until 2 a.m. So
And you think Ed was killed because he saw something?
yeah, I mean, he was in the middle of making dinner, so it must have been right around the same time. So I can only imagine that the killer or killers left their bodies either in the back of the house or somewhere, where they wouldn't be visible, but I don't know.
We should mention, too, that Kit Martin and his girlfriend
Laura Spencer.
lived like right across the street.
Yeah, pretty much directly across from Ed Dansereau and then sort of kitty corner from the Phillips house. It didn't take long for investigators to zero in on Christian Kit Martin as their prime suspect. The day after the discovery of the three bodies, police secured a search warrant for Kit's home. At the time, Kit was at work at Fort Campbell, leaving his wife Laura home alone. She was upstairs when she heard it, glass shattering, voices screaming. Panic surged through her. She couldn't make out the words, but the urgency in the voices sent her running. She grabbed her phone, bolted downstairs, and sprinted for the back door. The moment she stepped outside, 5 SWAT team members were there, rifles aimed at her head. They barked orders, yelling at her to put her phone down. She dropped it. Her hands were shaking. That moment would haunt her for years. Laura was so shaken by what had happened that she never again set foot inside the big yellow house on Main Street. Inside the house, investigators scoured every inch, seizing anything that might link Kit Martin to the murders. Among the confiscated items, multiple firearms, his home security system, his computer, and several boxes of documents related to his court-martial. Meanwhile, Kit himself was detained at Fort Campbell. He was locked in a cell for 5 days while authorities combed through his life. His car was searched. His work laptop was taken. He had no answers and no contact with the outside world. I can only assume that military law is very different from civilian law because they were basically able to just lock him up for 5 days with no arrest, no reason.
I was just going to ask, like, what evidence pointed them to Kit right away?
The only thing was the subpoena they found at Calvin and Pam's house that showed that he was going to be a witness in Kit's court-martial trial, which was only 2 weeks away. I think that was the main thing right out of the gate that they found. When he was finally released, he was handed a strict set of restrictions. He wasn't allowed to have contact with Laura, and he wasn't allowed to travel beyond 30 miles from the base. That latter restriction actually made it nearly impossible for Kit to meet with his lawyers because he was still preparing for his upcoming court-martial trial, which was now pushed back. It was originally supposed to be 2 weeks after the murders, but it was pushed back to March of 2016. So with 3 people dead and Kit Martin in the crosshairs, the question remained, was he truly the killer or was there more to the story?
So Kit wasn't arrested.
Right.
He was just thrown into some sort of military jail.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like I said, I don't know military law well enough to know what is allowed and what isn't allowed. But I think if you're in the military and they want to detain you, they can just do it. And I think they just held him for 5 days for no reason. He wasn't under arrest.
And you said possibly wasn't given food.
I did read some accounts where he wasn't given food during that 5 days, but I'm not sure if that's true or not. But yeah, it's pretty bad. And then to release him, but say, well, you can't have contact with your girlfriend and you can't go more than 30 miles from the base. Very, yeah, very strict and
Yeah, and did he had attorneys that were working on his court-martial
right.
case, and I'm curious if he had access to those attorneys or not.
Yeah, I don't know.
Kelvin's autopsy revealed the brutal extent of his injuries: 5 gunshot wounds from .45 caliber bullets, 3 to the chest, 1 to the neck, 1 to the right clavicle. But what made these bullets particularly disturbing was their type. They were RIP bullets manufactured by G2 Research, designed for maximum damage, each round separated into 8 razor-like fragments called trocars, shredding through flesh upon impact. As previously mentioned, much of the trauma to the lower part of Calvin's face had occurred before his death, while some of his other injuries were perimortem, meaning they happened around the time that he died. But there was something else. Calvin had no injuries to his hands, no defensive wounds. If his killer had beaten him first, there would have been signs of a struggle. Instead, the evidence suggested something even more chilling. Calvin was shot first, then dragged to the cellar stairs and thrown down while still alive. His face likely smashed against the steps as he tumbled down, a theory supported by the blood on the stairs and the tooth found beneath him. Pam and Ed had suffered a different fate. Both have been killed with .22 caliber bullets, each sustaining gunshot wounds to the brain. In Pam's case, there was also a bullet lodged in her heart. Shockingly, within just a few days of their murders, police turned the crime scene back over to the families. Given the sheer size and clutter of Calvin and Pam's house, it seemed impossible that investigators had processed everything thoroughly, and soon it became clear that they hadn't. Matt, Calvin and Pam's son, traveled from Louisville to help clean out the house, joined by Calvin's sister, Diana. It was a daunting task, one that would take months. A week or so after the murders, as they worked alongside their friend Linda, they began uncovering evidence that police had somehow overlooked. Linda was sweeping the kitchen when she spotted something small on the floor, a single .22 caliber bullet. Alarmed, they called the police, who returned to collect it. When they tested the area where the bullet was found, they also detected traces of Pam's blood. Both the bullet and the blood had been missed during the initial investigation. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. That same day, Diane made a find that would send chills down everyone's spine. On the top shelf of the built-in bookcase in the foyer, the same place where Calvin's wallet and phone had been found, she spotted something small and metallic. When she picked it up, she realized it was a military dog tag. Assuming it was her brother's dog tag, she clutched it to her chest and handed it to Matt. But when Matt looked at it, his face changed. "Aunt Diane, this isn't my dad's dog tag." Engraved on the tag was the name, Kit Martin. It was a baffling discovery. If Kit had been the killer, would he really have left something so incriminating behind? And was it even a real dog tag? Military dog tags don't use nicknames, meaning it should have said Christian Martin, not Kit Martin. Not only that, but it was hanging from a string rather than the standard issue metal chain. Most soldiers would tell you their dog tags would never be hung from a string. One could argue that the tag was planted after the fact, but police photos from their initial search showed the string dangling from the shelf. It had been there all along. The police had just failed to notice it.
So this is one of the most bizarre things about this
Yeah.
case is this dog tag. First of all, the fact that police didn't find it. Like it was sitting right up next to Calvin's wallet and phone. So they found his wallet and phone, but this dog tag sitting right next to it, they just ignored. Second, why would Kit Martin leave his dog tag there if he was the killer? It just makes no sense unless he was playing some really advanced game of 3D chess and left it there thinking no one would ever believe I would leave it there, right?
Well, like you said, it was on a string and it didn't
Mhm.
have his birth name on it.
Right.
It's all very strange. You can probably have a dog tag made.
Oh yeah, you can go anywhere on the internet and get a dog tag
But is
made.
it the same, quality gauge metal and, the same
Yeah.
font and all that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of different types of dog tags you can get made, but yeah, it's just very
It
strange.
is strange. 5 months later, yet another critical piece of evidence surfaced. While continuing to clean, that house must have been something.
Calvin was kind of a hoarder.
Diane found a spent .45 caliber shell casing on the back porch. It had been tucked away in a corner, hidden beneath a pile of wood, just feet from the cellar door where Calvin's body had been dumped.
Again, it's just crazy that the police turned the house back over in 3 days after the investigation, and this was found not very far from where his body was. So it's just kind of crazy that they didn't take more time with the scene.
It sounds like maybe the police were frustrated by the scene and knew that any evidence would be really hard to find, and it sounds like maybe it wasn't the best kept house, and the dirt and the grime and the dog hair and whatever.
Yeah, it seems like they just kind of gave up.
Before shifting our attention back to Kit's court-martial trial, another shocking twist unfolded in the weeks following the murders. On December 31st, just a month after the killings, Joan Harmon walked into an AT&T store with her kids and an iPhone in hand. She approached an employee and asked if he could help unlock the device. She didn't have the passcode. The employee took the phone to the back to check its details. What he found made his stomach drop. The phone belonged to Pamela Phillips. He recognized her name from the news and immediately called the police. Meanwhile, back in the store, the security camera captured Joan's reaction. As soon as the employee returned and informed her that the phone belonged to a murder victim and that the police were on their way, she quickly gathered her children and hurried out of the store. Later, Joan called the officer who had picked up the phone, offering an explanation. She claimed that her son had found the phone several days earlier in their front yard next to a tree. She had admitted that she had tried multiple times to guess the passcode, triggering a factory reset, completely wiping any potential evidence that might have been on it.
Did you know that if you put the wrong passcode in, I think it's 10 times in a row, you have the option to reset the phone to its factory settings?
That's insane.
I know. I did not know that.
That's still the case?
I believe so.
So then can you gain possession of the phone? Well, I guess it still has the same number, though.
Yeah.
This discovery should have sent up major red flags in the investigation. How did Pam's phone end up in Joan Harmon's hands? And why was Joan so desperate to gain access to it? Yet, instead of digging deeper, police did little more than drive by her house to confirm that, yes, there was, in fact, a tree in her front yard. Then they simply accepted her story and moved on. Holy cow.
I know. It's just...
That's crazy. Like, if you find a phone, you don't try to open it. You hand it over to the police.
Right. Yeah.
Especially if it's, a murder victim's phone.
Well, if her story is true, she didn't know it was a murder victim's phone. But still, why would you try to open a phone, multiple times? And it doesn't make sense. And the fact that the police didn't follow up on it also doesn't make sense.
Right. We'll be back after a break.
So the investigation into the murders kept going on, but in the meantime, Kit's court-martial trial finally began in May of 2016. Given the option of having his fate decided by a military judge or a panel of 8 peers, Kit chose the latter.
Calvin wasn't necessarily an important witness. Like his testimony, not having his testimony, do you think that would change the case?
I don't think it would change it that much, because the only thing he was really going to testify to is the fact that he was there when Joan found the classified material. So it gave a corroboration to that. But in Kit's mind, he'll say that he wanted Calvin there because Calvin also said that he never saw any abuse of the kids and he never witnessed anything. Joan never said anything to him about it. Without external corroboration of Joan's abuse allegations, the prosecution leaned heavily on a monster behind closed doors narrative, portraying Kit as someone who appeared respectable in public but was abusive in private. Joan and her children once again testified, repeated their claims of abuse. However, inconsistencies emerged between their testimony at this trial and what they had previously stated at the EPO hearing and the Article 32 hearing. Kit's defense team countered with witnesses who attested to his good character and some who told of Joan's history of dishonesty. Among them were Joan's first husband, Carlos Guerra, and Michael Atkins, who was Elijah's father, who was very much alive despite Joan's past claim that he had been decapitated. The trial concluded on Friday, March 13th, just one day before Kit's daughter Mackenzie's wedding. He could only hope that he could be there for her big day. Unlike civilian criminal trials, military court-martial decisions are made by panel members casting secret ballots. A guilty verdict requires a two-thirds majority. Kit was acquitted of the most serious charges, including sexual assault, child rape, aggravated assault, and threats of murder. However, he was found guilty on 2 counts of mishandling classified information and 2 counts of simple assault, specifically related to the injuries on Elijah's back that Joan had photographs of. While the verdict was largely in Kit's favor, it marked the end of his military career. His sentence included a formal reprimand, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, 90 days of confinement, and dismissal from the Army. Kit requested permission to attend his daughter's wedding before serving his sentence, but the judge denied his request. Instead, he was immediately shackled and taken into custody.
Oh boy, that's
Seems really
tough.
harsh. Like, yeah, it was only a 90-day sentence. It wasn't like he was in prison for life. Why not let him take one more day and go to his daughter's wedding?
It's probably why you're not a judge.
Probably why. Kit tried to stay optimistic during his 90-day incarceration. His military career was over, but he still had Laura. While he was in prison, she had relocated to Roanoke, North Carolina, and when he was released, he joined her there. The investigation into the murders of Pamela and Calvin Phillips and Ed Dansereau remained open, but Kit saw no reason to believe that he would be charged. He spent the following year working with the National Coalition for Men, advocating for soldiers that he believed had been wrongfully convicted due to false testimony. His work took him between North Carolina and Washington, D.C., where he met with senators and members of Congress to discuss the consequences of politically motivated reforms to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, particularly regarding sexual assault cases. Meanwhile, he and Laura bought an old house that he spent his free time renovating. In 2017, Kit learned of a growing pilot shortage. Airlines were actively seeking military-trained pilots, and those with experience could quickly advance from first officer to captain. Although Kit was already licensed to fly rotor wing aircraft or helicopters, he needed additional training to qualify for fixed wing aircraft. He dedicated 10 months to training before securing a job with Pacific Southwest Airlines, a regional carrier operating under American Airlines.
When Kit went to apply for jobs after his court-martial and jail time was up, do you think that he had to divulge that information on his application with the airlines?
It's a really good question. Yeah. I don't know if like when you have a conviction like that under military law, if that carries over, if you have to
is your military life separate from civilian life?
Yeah, I'm not sure. You would think that if you were applying for a job as a pilot, if you had a felony on your record or something serious like assault, that would probably prohibit you from being hired, but I'm not sure. As months turned into years without an arrest, Matt Phillips and his Aunt Diane refused to let the case fade into obscurity. They relentlessly pressured law enforcement and politicians, demanding justice. Their efforts were tireless. They made frequent television appearances, erected billboards advertising a $100,000 reward. They wrote letters. They directly lobbied Kentucky Attorney General Andy Beshear to take action. Their persistence finally paid off. In May 2018, the district attorney took the case to a grand jury, seeking an indictment against Kit Martin. The prosecution's case hinged on a single witness, Detective Scott Smith, the lead investigator. Smith testified that Kit had a clear motive to prevent Calvin Phillips from testifying at his upcoming court-martial. He presented ballistics evidence, claiming that bullets and shell casings found at the crime scene could be traced back to Kit's firearms. He also cited cell phone data, which, according to him, placed Kit's phone on Rosetown Road around the same time that Pam's car was set on fire in the early morning hours. That was all it took. The grand jury handed down an indictment. There was just one problem. Much of Smith's testimony was misleading, and in some cases, it was flat out false.
The day after the grand jury indictment, Kit Martin was on a layover in Louisville midway through a 4-day trip for work. Meanwhile, across town, Matt Phillips received a dramatic and unsettling phone call from the Attorney General's office late that night. The voice on the other end wasted no time. Quote, "You need to leave your house in the next 30 seconds. Get on the highway, go in a direction you don't normally take. Once you're in a car, call me back. Understandably shaken, Matt grabbed his computer, phone charger, and a handgun before rushing out the door. When he called back, he was told the moment had finally come. Kit Martin was about to be arrested. Since Kit was in Louisville, authorities claimed they were concerned for Matt's safety. Taking no chances, Matt drove all the way to Cincinnati and checked into a hotel for the night. Do you think he stopped at Skyline Chili?
Perhaps.
In an absurd overreaction, the Attorney General's office knew exactly where Kit was and why. He was in Louisville for work, just like any other routine layover. There was no indication that he posed any danger to Matt Phillips, a man he didn't even know. But the spectacle didn't stop there. Rather than making a quiet, straightforward arrest, authorities orchestrated a dramatic takedown. Multiple officers descended on Muhammad Ali International Airport, publicly handcuffing Kit in front of his crew members and passengers. Attorney General Andy Beshear defended the decision, claiming that arresting Kit at the airport was the safest option for both officers and the public. But the reasoning didn't hold up. Instead, the move seemed more like political theater, especially considering Beshear was in the middle of a gubernatorial campaign, with the primary election just 2 weeks away. And if that was the goal, it worked. The media latched onto the story, amplifying it with sensational headlines. The public took notice, and in November 2019, Andy Beshear was elected as Kentucky's next governor.
This whole thing makes me so irritated. Like the fact that they called Calvin's son and like got him in a panic because they're like, oh, Kit's going to come over and kill you, when there was just no evidence to show that. And they could have been watching Kit the whole time anyway. So yeah, the whole thing is just very irritating.
Mm. Kit Martin was slapped with a staggering $3 million cash bond. I don't know if I've ever heard one that high.
Yeah.
$1 million for each victim. His family initially assumed they'd need to come up with about 10% of that amount to secure his release before trial. But the judge had other plans. By setting it as a cash bond, he ensured they would need the full $3 million, an impossible sum. Kit would remain behind bars until his day in court. When Kit's attorney got his hands on the grand jury testimony from Detective Scott Smith, he was furious. The most damning piece of evidence? Cell phone location data. Smith had testified that Kit's phone was on Rosetown Road at 2 a.m., the exact time Pam's car was set on fire. That, Smith claimed, placed Kit at the scene. But there was just one problem. The claim was completely false. Kit's legal team brought in a cell phone expert to analyze the data, and the findings were damning. Not for Kit, but for Detective Smith. In his report, the expert concluded, quote, "My review of the above information shows that Lieutenant Smith's grand jury testimony is often not supported by the CAST reports, is misleading, and it relates to the actual data, contradicts the data, and excludes evidence in the report which refutes his testimony. Any statements or claims that a device had to be in a very specific location, narrow area, or along a particular roadway are unfounded and shown a distinct lack of knowledge, understanding, or honesty about the underlying data." In reality, Pembroke was a rural area with few cell phone towers, making precise location tracking nearly impossible. At best, the data could place Kit's phone within a 50 to 60 mile radius, nowhere near the pinpoint accuracy that Smith had claimed.
So the whole, like the distance between the crime scene where Calvin, Pamela, and Ed were killed and where Pam's car was found was about 2 miles. And so Detective Smith is basically testifying that, oh yeah, Kit's phone was exactly here where the car was burning, when there was really no way to get
Pinpoint
that.
it to that accuracy.
Exactly.
Armed with this evidence, Kit's attorney was confident he had grounds to get the case dismissed. He filed a motion arguing that the indictment was based on false testimony. But the judge wasn't swayed. He ruled that the cell phone evidence was just one piece of the grand jury's decision. Other evidence had been presented as well. But the truth was the cell phone data had been the linchpin of the case, and without it, the foundation of the indictment was weak.
I did read that Detective Smith later agreed that his testimony was incorrect, but he basically said, "Oh, I just made a mistake, or I misunderstood the data."
I think cell phone data is like a lot of the other evidence that we have in these cases, like blood spatter and just any number of evidence, like some DNA testing.
Yeah.
It's just
It can be so
it
confusing.
can
It's
be
just
really
so hard to
confusing, and
understand.
it's still a relatively new science.
Hmm.
So yeah, I can understand why that's problematic evidence.
Yeah.
As the trial date loomed, prosecutors made Kit Martin an offer: plead guilty to 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and he'd receive a sentence of 5 to 13 years. With immediate parole eligibility, he could potentially walk free much sooner. Kit didn't hesitate. He turned it down. His attorney saw the deal for what it was, a sign that the prosecution wasn't confident in their case. If they truly believed Kit was a triple murderer, why offer him a sentence that could put him back on the streets in just a few years? In the lead up to the trial, 2 key developments unfolded. First, Joan and Elijah, who had once been central figures in Kit's life, were both subpoenaed to testify. But through their attorneys, they informed the court that they planned to invoke their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. Oh, that's frustrating, isn't
Yeah.
it? This presented a strategic opportunity for Kit's defense. The judge could force them to take the stand, where they'd have to invoke the Fifth in front of the jury. That kind of moment could be powerful. Seeing 2 potential suspects refuse to testify might plant serious doubt in the jurors' minds and bolster Kit's alternative perpetrator defense. But there was another option. The judge could simply excuse them from testifying altogether, robbing the defense of a crucial moment. And that's exactly what he did. Then came another major blow to Kit's case. Judge Atkins ruled that 4 witnesses could testify that just weeks before his murder, Calvin or Pam Phillips had told them that if anything happened to them, authorities should look at Kit Martin. Kit's defense immediately objected. These were hearsay statements which are generally inadmissible in court. But there are exceptions. One of them applies if the defendant caused the death of the person who made the statement. Kit's lawyers argued that the prosecution had no evidence of any direct threats from Kit to Calvin, so the hearsay shouldn't be allowed. The judge disagreed. The testimony would be allowed. With 2 major pretrial rulings going against them, Kit's defense team knew they were in for an uphill battle.
Kit's trial finally began in June 2021. To break things down clearly, let's take a closer look at 4 key areas of evidence: ballistics, cell phone data, hearsay testimony, and Kit's own security camera footage. Let's start with the ballistics evidence. This is a crucial element in the prosecution's case. If you recall, Calvin Phillips was killed with a .45 caliber weapon using specialized RIP bullets designed for maximum damage. A single .45 caliber shell casing was later found on the back porch 5 months after the murders.
Keep in mind, I don't know much about weapons, but these RIP bullets, are they accessible to the public? This isn't a
They're
military grade bullet
accessible,
or
yeah, but they're
anything?
not common at all.
Okay.
And no bullets of that type were found in Kit's house or in his truck or anywhere. Investigators compared the recovered bullets and the bullet fragments from bullets test fired from Kit's Glock 45. The results, no match. The markings on the evidence bullets were noticeably different from those fired from Kit's gun. However, the differences weren't strong enough to completely rule out his gun either. Then there was the shell casing found months later. This was a different story. Ballistics confirmed that the casing was definitively fired from Kit's Glock. Prosecutors seized on this detail, calling it the next best thing to a smoking gun, clear proof that Kit's weapon had been used at the crime scene. But there were serious problems with that theory. First, the shell casing was found 5 months after the murders, which that alone raises doubts. Was it overlooked for months, or was it potentially planted to frame Kit? Joan had access to Kit's Glock. Kit kept the gun in his truck, and he believed that Joan knew that and had access to it around the time of the murders. Also, Kit and Joan had fired the Glock at Calvin's house before. If you remember in part 1, we talked about Calvin had a backyard shooting range, and had even hosted a concealed carry class that Joan attended using Kit's Glock. So it's entirely possible that shell casings from Kit's gun were left on the property long before the murders. There was also a key technical detail that contradicted the prosecution's claim. The recovered shell casing had a brass primer, but the RIP bullets used to kill Calvin were normally manufactured with a nickel primer. So it's a very subtle detail, but the shell casing that was found likely came from a different type of bullet than the ones that killed Calvin. So it's very possible that the shell casing and the bullet were two separate things. Does that make sense?
Calvin had been shot 5 times.
Right.
And how many of the bullets were found or casings were found from those 5 shots?
The only shell casing that was found was this one that was found 5 months later.
Okay.
I don't know how many bullets were found. I know at least some bullets were found from him being shot.
And we think that he was shot outside.
I think so. At least some of the times he was shot were outside. I think there was one bullet found in the basement. So he was at least shot once after
In the
being
basement, you
moved
mean
to
cellar.
in the cellar. Yeah, correct. All right, let's shift gears to the murders of Pamela Phillips and Ed Dansereau, because those involved a completely different weapon, a .22 caliber gun. So Kit did own 3 .22 caliber firearms. Investigators test-fired rounds from each and compared them to the bullets found at the crime scene. Their conclusion was they couldn't rule out that Kit's guns were the murder weapon. Now that might sound damning, but in reality it didn't really mean anything. The bullets had markings that were typical of most .22 caliber guns, which means that they could have come from one of Kit's or from almost any other .22 caliber firearm. So while the prosecution framed the ballistics evidence as incriminating, a closer look revealed a murky, inconclusive picture. Now let's talk about the cell phone data, which was another key piece of evidence that, at first glance, seemed to work against Kit, but when you examine it closely, it actually pointed in his favor. We've already discussed how Detective Smith misled the grand jury, whether intentionally or not. He testified that Kit's phone could be placed on Rosetown Road at 2 a.m., right when Pamela Phillips' car was set on fire, but that was completely false. Given the limited number of cell towers in rural Pembroke, it was impossible to pinpoint a phone's exact location with any degree of accuracy, so the prosecution's claim simply wasn't supported by the data. Then there was another critical detail, one that should have helped Kit's defense. Remember how Pam Phillips' phone turned up in Joan's possession? Well, Joan claimed her son had found it in their yard. The police didn't question her story. They believed that Kit must have tossed it there as he drove by, possibly to frame her. If that were true, it meant that Kit had possession of both his own phone and Pam's phone up until, whenever he allegedly threw hers into Joan's yard. But the location data told a different story. On November 19th, the day after the murders, both Kit's and Pam's phones were turned on and pinging off of cell phone towers. However, they moved in completely different directions at the same time. Kit's phone was traveling south from Pembroke to Fort Campbell, where he worked. Pam's phone, on the other hand, was heading northeast, first connecting to towers in Elkton and then Russellville. So that's a big problem for the prosecution's theory, because Kit couldn't be in 2 places at once. So this was clear, objective evidence that someone else had possession of Pam's phone after the murders, and yet instead of investigating that lead, prosecutors doubled down on their case against Kit.
Where was Laura Spencer at the time of the murders?
When Calvin was killed in the morning, Laura was at work.
Mm-hmm.
She had left early that morning because she had clinicals. She taught nursing. So she was definitely gone at that point in time. She came home in the afternoon. She and Kit were together that afternoon. They both told the story that they had dinner together. It was their anniversary, so they spent some special time together. And then she and Kit were home that night as well when Pam's car was burned.
2 people would have been necessary for these murders to take place, I would assume.
I think so.
That's why I'm asking about Laura.
Yeah.
Could she have been an accomplice?
Right. No, it's a good question.
And also, Pam's phone was actively moving.
Right. The day after the murders. We'll be back after a break.
The hearsay testimony presented at trial didn't look great for Kit. The prosecution brought forward 4 witnesses who claimed that just weeks before their deaths, Calvin and Pam had told them, "If anything happens to us, the police should take a close look at Kit Martin." One of the most compelling witnesses was Pam's coworker, Penny Case. She recalled a conversation in which she asked Pam why she and Calvin weren't planning to visit her family in Michigan for Thanksgiving. According to Penny, Pam's response was chilling. Quote, "Cal and I are not going to leave the house at the same time. We're afraid if we do, we'll come back and Kit will be in our house waiting for us." Penny, startled, pressed further. "Do you really think Kit would hurt you?" Pam's reply, "Yes, I do. If anything happens to us, tell the police all they need to do is look at that yahoo across the street." The testimony certainly painted Kit in a bad light, but keep in mind that none of the witnesses recalled Pam or Calvin mentioning any specific threats from Kit. They testified only to Calvin and Pam's fears, not to anything Kit had actually said or done. Also, the timing of these statements was significant. They were made shortly after private investigator Mary Martins visited Calvin for the second time, meaning Calvin knew that Kit was looking into his potential court-martial testimony and his relationship with Joan. This raised an important question. Were Calvin and Pam genuinely afraid of Kit, or were they reacting to the legal and personal entanglements between them? So Calvin and Pam were still friendly with Joan.
I honestly don't know the nature of Joan's relationship with Pam. She and Calvin were very close. Like we said, there were rumors around town that they were having an affair. And I think that she and Calvin were still friendly at this time, but I don't know for sure.
One of the key points of contention at trial was Kit's timeline and how his home security's camera factored into it. Kit had 2 security cameras, one on the back porch, which recorded any movement in or out through the rear of the house, and one facing the driveway, which also captured part of the Phillips driveway across the street. However, on the day of the murders, the driveway camera wasn't working. Kit later discovered that the wire had been cut, though it was never proven who was responsible. Kit did not have a camera covering his front door, and that door itself became a major issue during the trial. Kit claimed that his front door was practically inoperable. He explained that when he moved into the house, it had been sitting vacant for 2 years, and the wooden door frame had warped. In an effort to fix it over time, he had installed multiple deadbolt locks, used a door stop to keep the door straight, and nailed parts of the door into place and wedged insulation around it. According to Kit, this made using the front door nearly impossible, which was critical to his defense, because if he couldn't use the front door or the front windows, which he said were also blocked, then he couldn't have left the house to commit the murders without being seen on his security camera. The prosecution dismissed Kit's claims as nonsense, but they never actually proved that the door was functional. They presented no video or photos of the door being used. There was no testimony about the door from investigators who searched Kit's house the day after the murders, and no physical evidence contradicting Kit's claims. It wasn't just Kit's word either. A contractor who worked on Kit's home testified that the front door was extremely difficult to open. Laura and her son Austin also confirmed that in the time they lived there, they never saw anyone use the front door. With that in mind, let's examine the timeline of events starting with the morning of November 18th. We know that Calvin was killed somewhere between 6:30 a.m. and 10:50 a.m. Kit had a window of opportunity between 7:23 a.m. and 9:11 a.m. when he was home alone, but Kit's security camera never recorded him leaving the house during that time. Did the security camera show him leaving at some point during the day?
Yeah, I mean, the camera showed him when he left for work at 9:11 a.m.
Okay.
So all the other times that we can talk about with Kit coming and going were all captured on that backdoor security camera.
Well, next, let's take the evening of November 18th. Pam was likely killed around 5:30 p.m. while she was on the phone with Marlene LaRock. Ed was probably killed around the same time or shortly after. At 5:23 p.m., Laura's kids left for dinner at Chick-fil-A, leaving Laura and Kit home alone to celebrate their anniversary. For Kit to have killed Pam and Ed, he would have had to leave through the front door, which we already talked about was basically unusable, and he would have had to sneak out without Laura noticing and be gone for at least 30 to 40 minutes. Unless Laura was with him.
Yeah, if Kit was the killer and Laura was his accomplice, then you could throw all of this out the window.
Laura testified that Kit was with her all evening, making dinner, spending special time together because it was rare for them to be home alone without the kids and watching TV. Additionally, we know that Pam's car was moved by the killer between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. Marlene LaRocque saw the car parked facing the house at 6 p.m. When she returned at 7 p.m., the car had been turned around. She's very observant. I don't know if I would notice our neighbor's car being
I think she was
turned.
on alert because she could tell something was weird
Oh,
was
that's
going
true because
on.
of the phone call.
And the door was open, and I think this is a little bit of an aside, but I think she became very close to being the fourth victim. So I think because she stepped into the house at one point when the killer was probably there, and then she backed out and decided not to. But yeah, she knew, the timeline of what.
Yeah, that is scary. This means the killer had to have been gone for at least 30 minutes, which contradicts Laura's testimony that Kit was home with her the entire time. Lastly, let's look at the early morning hours of the 19th when Pam's car was set ablaze. We know the fire on Rosetown Road was set around 1:45 a.m. The prosecution's examination of Kit's phone showed that before going to bed, he had set an alarm for 1:10 a.m. At first glance, that looks really bad for Kit. Was he setting the alarm so he could go dispose of the bodies? Kit's explanation is that he had a kerosene heater that he had just started using for the season. Their regular propane heat didn't cut it during the colder months. When using the kerosene heater, he would get up at least once a night to check on it. Laura confirmed in her testimony that Kit normally did this, and the weather had gotten colder in the days leading up to November 18th, so it would make sense that he was starting to use the kerosene heater at that point. Laura said that she remembered Kit getting up when his alarm went off at 1:10 a.m. She also said that when she got up around 2 a.m. to use the restroom, she saw Kit in the den, either watching TV or on his computer. Even if her time estimate was off by 15 minutes either way, Kit still couldn't have been out on Rosetown Road setting fire to the car. It is kind of weird, though, that he was up on his computer at 2 a.m.
Well, I mean, he got up to check on the kerosene heater, and then apparently he couldn't get back to sleep or decided just to chill out for a bit before going back to bed.
The prosecution argued that Kit could have sneaked out to commit the murders and later burned Pam's car, but in their versions of events, he would have to do it without Laura noticing and by using the front door, which several people said was unusable.
Or, as you pointed out, that Laura could have been an accomplice and could have been lying for him as well.
While the timeline wasn't airtight proof of Kit's innocence, it raised serious doubts about whether he could have committed the crimes as alleged. One more quick thing about the evidence presented by the prosecution. There was no forensic evidence other than the .45 shell casing found 5 months after the fact that linked Kit Martin to the crime scene. None of his DNA was found, despite lab testing of several samples taken at the crime scene and from Ed Dansereau's car. Most of the samples taken at the crime scene could be identified as belonging to the victims. There was one sample that showed a major DNA profile match to Pam and a minor DNA profile for an unknown person. Pam, Ed, Calvin, and Kit were all excluded from that sample. There were hairs found in Ed's car that were deemed microscopically similar to Kit's hair, but none that had enough DNA for testing. And labeling a hair as microscopically similar is essentially meaningless. Many people have hair with similar microscopic characteristics. No testing was done to compare any samples to other potential suspects, such as Joan or people close to Joan, like her boyfriend or her son.
Lisa Petrie, the manager of the diner where Joan worked, testified that Joan was acting unusually excited the day after the murders. According to Lisa, Joan couldn't stop talking about the case. She was strangely happy, almost obsessed with it. One particular comment stood out to Lisa. Joan said that whoever had killed Calvin had let his pet snakes loose in the house. This was an especially bizarre statement because nothing about snakes had been reported in the news, and the police report made no mention of snakes. Lisa Petrie was so unnerved by Joan's behavior and her comments that she called Detective Scott Smith to report it. Smith spoke to her and noted that there were no pet snakes inside the residence or any evidence that there had been snakes inside the residence. Then, like so many other things in this case that didn't support Kit Martin's guilt, Smith dropped it and didn't go digging any further. There actually was evidence that Calvin kept snakes, most likely in the shed behind his house or in his warehouse. His friend Marlene LaRocque said that Calvin kept venomous snakes as a security measure to deter intruders. Kit also remembered Joan saying something about Calvin's snakes at some point. So what happened to the snakes, and why would Joan say that? There was never any other mention of snakes. Like, no one ever said anything about finding any snakes or anything. So if there were snakes, they were set loose and they just vanished into the wilderness.
So there was no evidence that snakes had lived in the house? There weren't snake cages or...
No, like I said, if he did have snakes, they were probably in his warehouse or in the shed behind his house, but I never heard anything about any evidence of like snake cages or anything. Not long after the murders, Lisa and the owner of the diner finally decided to fire Joan. They had wanted to for a long time, but they were afraid that she would retaliate. They had grown fed up with her rudeness to customers and coworkers and her overt flirtation with male customers in an attempt to get bigger tips. When they finally fired her, they were so concerned about her reaction that they had a police officer on site, worried that she might do something erratic or dangerous. At the time of the murders, Joan's boyfriend was William Stokes, a man with two brothers in law enforcement. One brother was a volunteer firefighter who was among the first on the scene when Pam's car was found burned. The other brother was a Christian County Sheriff's deputy who had been at both crime scenes. Kit's defense team issued a subpoena for William Stokes to testify. However, the private investigator hired to serve him was unable to locate him, and so the subpoena was never delivered. The defense closed their case with Kit taking the stand in his own defense. He wanted the jury to hear directly from him, hoping to convince them that the alleged motive for the crime, that he wanted to stop Calvin from testifying at his court-martial, was simply not true. According to Kit, Calvin's testimony would have actually helped his case, not hurt it. Calvin had been close to Joan, yet he had never mentioned anything about her claims of abuse, sexual assault, or molestation. To reinforce this point, Kit's court-martial defense team had even subpoenaed Calvin to ensure that he would testify. Why would I go through the trouble of subpoenaing him, Kit argued, only to turn around and kill him? After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all counts. The following day, during the penalty phase, they recommended life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that the judge upheld. Following the verdict, Kit issued a final statement, quote, "I've always been willing to give my life for my country, and now they have taken it." Kit's defense team swiftly filed an appeal, arguing multiple points of legal error. They contended that the hearsay statements should never have been admitted, that Joan and Elijah should have been compelled to testify, and that key alternative perpetrator evidence had been unfairly excluded. Additionally, they challenged the validity of the .45 caliber shell casing found by Diana Phillips 5 months after the murders, arguing that it should never have been allowed as evidence. That last point raises serious concerns. Diana had reportedly failed a polygraph test about discovering the shell casing. While the exact questions and her responses remain unknown, the fact that investigators were skeptical enough to administer a polygraph and that she failed casts doubts on the integrity of that piece of evidence. Diana and her nephew Matt had been pushing hard for Kit's arrest, firmly believing that he was the killer. Could they have planted the shell casing themselves, or did someone else plant it and then tip them off to its location? Diana had said that she found the shell casing while cleaning, but the security camera footage from when she found the shell casing, so Diana and Matt had installed security cameras after the murders, the security camera shows her crawling around on the porch on her hands and knees for 13 minutes before finding the shell casing. She wasn't cleaning. She was clearly looking for something. The truth behind those questions remains a mystery. Ultimately, the Kentucky Supreme Court denied Kit's appeal. However, 2 justices dissented, calling the evidence against him underwhelming. Although Kit was already tried, convicted, and serving his sentence, some new evidence arose in late 2023 that Detective Smith said further reinforced Kit's guilt. During a phone call from prison with his sister, Kit asked her to recover a box that he had hidden inside the stairs of the Raleigh, North Carolina house that he had lived in after the murders. He didn't tell his sister what was in the box, but according to Detective Scott Smith, he was definitely urgent that his sister find it before the house was sold. Detectives flew to Raleigh and recovered the box, which they said contained a .22 caliber AR-15 and a silencer that fit both the AR-15 and the Glock 45 that prosecutors believed was used to kill Calvin Phillips. This is an interesting find because one question has always been how no one heard gunshots coming from the Phillips home. While the homes in that area aren't super close together, they're also not very far apart. It's about 100 feet between Calvin and Pam's house and the house next door. Calvin was killed on a Wednesday morning. Pam and Ed killed Wednesday early evening around 5:30 or 6. So it's surprising that no one reported hearing gunshots, so a silencer might help to explain that. Emilio Corsetti, who wrote the book I Will Ruin You, which was my primary source for this case, he's been a staunch advocate for Kit Martin's innocence. When news of this new evidence came out in 2024, he wrote a blog about it, downplaying the significance of this so-called bombshell. He teased that, quote, "There are details about this new evidence that I'm not ready to share just yet. That will be done at the appropriate time and venue."
Oh.
Now, I haven't seen any more from him on that topic since that blog, which was almost a year ago. It was April 2024. But even without these secret details he claims to have, he makes some good points in the blog. First, during Kit's trial, the prosecution was so sure that they already had the .22 caliber gun that killed Pam and Ed. It was one of the 3 .22 caliber weapons that they had already seized from Kit, they said. Now Detective Smith is telling the news media that he believes this new weapon is the murder weapon. So it raises the question, were they not convinced they had the right weapon before? Also, they said that Kit's Glock 45 was used to kill Calvin. Why would he put one murder weapon in his gun safe where it would be easily found, and the other one he would go to great lengths to hide under the stairwell of his new home? It just doesn't make sense that he would have 2 murder weapons and he would treat them both so differently. Lastly, Detective Smith and others made a big deal about Kit owning a silencer, saying there's no reason for someone to own one. But in his blog, Corsetti points out that silencers are perfectly legal in Kentucky and that many people like to use them either for hearing protection or because they don't want to disturb people nearby. And lastly, silencers don't completely eliminate the noise of a gun firing. At best, they reduce it by 25 to 35%. Detective Scott Smith, a key figure in Kit's indictment and conviction, is a controversial figure. His testimony before the grand jury, as one cell phone expert put it, quote, "shows a distinct lack of knowledge, understanding, or honesty about the underlying data." In other words, he either misrepresented the evidence or simply didn't understand it. Beyond that, Smith failed to pursue multiple leads that didn't align with the theory that Kit was the killer. He ignored Lisa Petrie's report about Joan's giddy behavior after the murders and her eerie comment about snakes. He overlooked the fact that Joan had possession of Pam Phillips' phone, repeatedly trying to guess the passcode until she wiped it clean. Smith made a classic investigative error, whether intentional or not, of deciding on a suspect first and dismissing evidence that pointed elsewhere. Perhaps most shocking, during the 2 years he led the investigation, Smith never once called Kit in for an interview. He never asked him about the 1:10 a.m. alarm or any other key details. Even if he believed Kit was lying, an interview could have opened new investigative paths. And there's more. At the time, Smith was a defendant in a civil case accusing him and other Kentucky State Police officers of falsifying evidence and withholding exculpatory information in a separate case. The outcome of that lawsuit remains unclear, but it raises serious questions about Smith's credibility. We've talked a lot about Kit Martin and Joan Harmon in this case, but I want to make sure we don't forget about the victims. Calvin Phillips filled his time on Earth with a zest for life and laughter. He traveled the world both in the military as well as a private citizen, having seen numerous continents, countries, and people all over the U.S. and the world, never ceasing to be amazed at nature, God's beauty, or simple things that make the world great. Pamela Phillips made the most of her time as a mother, coworker, and citizen. She spent a near decade devoting her time as a stay-at-home mom and then re-entered the workforce with vigor. She was active in the community and often spent her free time to better those in need. Both were loving parents, active citizens, and extremely important to those who knew them dearly and had the privilege to call them family or friends. Ed Dansereau was a gifted jazz pianist who spent most of his life spreading love, music, and warmth to all those around him. With a zeal to live every day to its fullest, Ed could turn each chance encounter into a genuine connection, which is why he was known in the community as an extraordinary host, son, father, partner, and friend. Ed never differentiated between anyone, blood or not. Rest in peace, Calvin, Pam, and Ed.
Well said.
Just a few updates I was able to find since the trial ended. Kit's daughter, Mackenzie, who was pregnant when she testified at her dad's trial, gave birth to a girl that she and her husband named Nora James. Kit's son, Chase, has a 3-year-old daughter named Riley. He owns a landscaping business, and Kit's youngest son, Zachary, was studying to be a veterinarian. Joan's first husband, Carlos Guerra, after he got his citizenship, hired an attorney to file divorce papers and attempt to gain custody of his girls, Essie and Alma. The divorce was finalized in April of 2016, and Carlos was granted visitation rights. Joan and her kids, they've kept a low profile on social media. In prison, Kit teaches GED classes to other inmates. He's involved in a Bible study group and has been learning to play the guitar, as well as taking violin lessons from other inmates. In 2023, while still waiting for the outcome of his appeal, he told Laura not to wait for him any longer. Laura moved from North Carolina to Wisconsin, where she is working as a travel nurse. There is an active Facebook group called Free Christian Kit Martin that has over 2,000 members who believe that Kit is innocent. So there's a few things I want to talk about here.
Mm-hmm.
First, do you think that Kit Martin committed these murders?
Well, I have a question for you first.
Okay.
What was your source?
My main source was a book called I Will Ruin You by Emilio Corsetti III.
Do you think that Mr. Corsetti told the story he told the whole story, and was he biased in telling the story?
So it's a good question. So first of all, it wasn't my only source. There was a Dateline on the case. I read a bunch of newspaper articles and other articles about the case. Emilio Corsetti clearly believes that Kit is innocent and was wrongfully convicted of this crime, but his book is very well sourced. I believe it's very accurate. So you can be accurate and still have a slant, or an opinion on the case. And he clearly has an opinion, but I do believe that all of the facts laid out in his book are accurate.
As the evidence you presented very well, as did Mr. Corsetti, I mean, to me, it seems like there is definitely reasonable doubt. And I don't know if I would have found him guilty had I been a juror.
But do you think, take that aside, the reasonable doubt question, do you think that he did it, though, in your heart of hearts? Even if you think there was reasonable doubt and you wouldn't have convicted him?
Well, again, as the evidence was presented to me, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think that, the evidence against, like Joan, knowing his weapons, having access to his weapons, but then Joan would have had to have had an accomplice. Was it her boyfriend? I would hope that she wouldn't have gotten her son involved. I don't know. What's your opinion?
This case has been like a roller coaster for me when I was researching it. The first thing I did was watch the Dateline episode, which leaned heavily on...
Was Kit featured in the episode?
He was, yeah.
I think I would like to hear his voice. I would like to see him. I haven't even seen a picture. I don't know why that always seems to me like I could make a better...
Yeah, he was featured in the episode. They did have an interview with him, but they also featured heavily Calvin and Pam's son, Matt, and Calvin's sister, Diana, who were very clearly of the opinion that Kit committed the crime. So for me, it's been a roller coaster. Like I say, when I started, I was like, oh yeah, he probably did it. And then as I read the book, I was firmly convinced that he didn't do it. But then the things that make me wonder are the hearsay evidence does make me wonder a little bit. If four people all testified to the fact that Calvin or Pam were said, hey, if anything happens to us, it was
Yeah,
Kit.
I am wondering what happened there because you
Yeah.
portrayed Kit as a pretty, like,
Yeah.
seemed like he was a good guy. He was pretty honest.
Right.
The court martial seemed a little bit of a fiasco.
Yeah.
So yeah, I am curious what happened with the relationship with Kelvin and Pam.
Right. For them to be that afraid of him, that it feels like there's something there. The other thing, the whole setting the alarm at 10 a.m., I know Kit has an explanation for it, and it sounds like it is something he legitimately did, get up and check on the kerosene heater. But it does seem like quite a coincidence that, oh yeah, he set his alarm for 1:10 a.m. and the bodies were moved at 1:30 or 1:45.
Setting an alarm at 1:10 instead of 1
Mm-hmm.
is a little strange, but I would think if your intent was to go, do this heinous act, would you need to set an alarm? Would you be falling asleep?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think you
Yeah.
would be like nervous and like formulating in your mind, like, how am I going to do this? I don't
Right.
think you would need to set an alarm.
Yeah, I agree. And then the other thing that makes me wonder a little bit is the fact that they found this silencer and this gun that Kit apparently had hidden and told his sister to go and get it. I mean, that does seem suspicious to me.
But if it was the murder weapon, why would he have kept it?
Yeah,
And where had it been? So did the police searched his house,
they searched
right?
his house the day after the murder. So yeah, I don't know
Yeah, so
where it
if
would
it
have
were the
been.
murder weapon, I don't know. Now I'm sounding like I am biased, but I mean, I would think if it were the murder weapon, he would have disposed of it and
Yeah,
not had it moved and,
yeah. But on the other hand, so those are the things that make me wonder a little bit. But on the other hand, like the dog tag found, that just, there's no way if Kit Martin committed these murders that he's going to leave a dog tag with his name on it at the scene. That just
Mhm.
doesn't make any sense. That just seems so clearly planted by someone else.
Yeah.
So
And it
that,
wasn't even planted. It was kind of left out in the open,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
strange
it
too.
was left right by Calvin's wallet
Mhm.
and his phone. That and the fact that Joan had Pam's cell phone, like that again makes no sense. That she had the cell phone, she brought it into the AT&T store. She kind of freaked out
What do you
when.
think her intent was in bringing it to the AT&T store rather than bringing it to the
The
police?
only thing I can think of is that she really wanted to get in the phone to see what was on it, or
Mhm.
maybe to, get rid of anything that was incriminating. And maybe she thought, oh, if I take it into the AT&T store, maybe they'll just be able to unlock it for me without questioning it. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, that's the only thing I can think of. But that whole
I would
thing,
Yeah, I would probably just dispose of it, but
yeah, it's very, very baffling.
I don't really see a motive to kill Pam and Kelvin, though. Especially Pam. Like, why would
Right.
he come back to kill Pam several hours later?
Yeah. That is also a very good question. Did the person come back, whoever killed them, did they come back to kill Pam, or did they come back for another reason and then Pam happened to come home and they killed her because she walked in on them? That whole thing is just baffling too. In one interview that I saw with Kit, he sort of implied that Calvin was involved in some shady stuff, and I didn't include any of that in the story because I didn't find
Hmm.
anything to basically, prove that statement. But there is a possibility that it could have been a different person uninvolved with the whole Kit Martin, Joan Harmon thing. It could have been somebody that had a beef with Calvin and killed them for another reason. We just don't know.
So Kelvin was supposed to testify in 2 weeks' time.
Right.
And I don't know. I just don't think that
It doesn't seem like a motive.
it doesn't.
His
Because,
testimony, even if he was going to, it just didn't seem like his testimony was that damning.
right.
We knew that Kit had that wherever this classified information came from, Kit was probably going to get in trouble for it, because even if it was just accidentally taken home, you can't do that
Hmm.
if you're in the military. So I don't know. I just don't know that Calvin's testimony would have made much of a difference one way or another.
Yeah, unless there was some other beef there that we don't know about.
Yeah. This case is definitely one of the most baffling cases I've researched. I do firmly believe that he should not have been convicted
Mm-hmm.
one way or another. I just don't believe that the evidence was there to convict him beyond a reasonable doubt. Thanks once again to Julie for recommending this case. I really appreciate it because I really loved researching this case.
The other day, one of our wonderful listeners sent something to me that was kind of funny. It was, you probably saw it, I posted it on Instagram. It was like a new meme, like my emergency contact, and it shows your emergency contact doing something, silly or, not very serious.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, it was like the husband was looking in the refrigerator for a jar of, I think it was ketchup.
Yes.
Yeah. First of all, how do you spell ketchup?
I spell it CATSUP.
Do you?
I don't know.
I think I go back and forth.
It's the weirdest thing.
It is so weird that there's two ways to spell ketchup.
I know. And CATSUP, how is that pronounced ketchup? That doesn't make any sense. But
True.
anyway, we digress.
But it just made me laugh because this does happen in our house all the time.
It does happen all the time.
What is it with men and why can't you find things? Because, like you're supposed to be the hunters and gatherers in our society.
Do you know why that is? I'll tell you why it is.
Okay.
It's because you put the things away. So you know where the things are because you put them away.
But you live in this house and it's not like I'm like, I'm gonna trick him and put things, because this literally happened the other day, right?
It happens all the time.
It's so funny because you always come to, like, you're absolutely positive
it's not
that
there.
this item is not there. You're like, you always come to me with like this look of like, I got her this time. I got her, and it was, you were looking for antihistamine the other day, and you're like, where's that antihistamine you said you bought? And I was like, okay, I can tell you where it is, or I will go and show you. And it was there, wasn't it?
Yes, it was there. But it's
while
because,
I'm roasting you, go ahead.
It's because you were aware of the antihistamine and the fact that it was in a box.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right? I was looking for something that was in a little tube or a little like liquidy type form. So I was looking for something completely different than the box that it actually was in.
Gotcha.
So
all right,
that's fine.
Makes complete sense. Yes.
Yes.
But I also want to say that I lose things. Like I was laughing at myself last night because I spent 30% of my day looking for things that I personally have misplaced.
That's true.
So you never lose like an AirPod.
Right. My phone.
You never lose your phone. And I am constantly losing the things that I myself misplace.
That is true. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. It really, it annoys the heck out of me because it
You
happens.
were searching for your AirPods for months before you finally gave up.
Right, because I think I left them in a hotel that we stayed at. That's the only thing that makes sense, because when I do, and it was driving me bananas because, I really loved my AirPod Pros, and actually you were kind enough the other day and you're like, just buy a new pair. I'm like, all right. So that I really am so grateful that I have them back.
Yeah.
And there's a feature now like that I haven't turned it on. I shouldn't even tell you that this exists because you always come up to me when I have them on, and it's always like, because I'm listening to a podcast or whatever, and I always get a little annoyed. But there's a new feature where if you approach me, like my AirPods are supposed to know and like turn off, but I haven't turned that feature
Interesting.
on.
I thought you were going to say the feature was like if the AirPods detect the voice of a really important person, like your husband, that they would just automatically let that voice through and shut down. That would be cool.
Sure, that would be great. I also think it's funny, like whenever someone else empties the dishwasher, like no one ever wants to empty the dishwasher. I don't know why. That's everyone's least favorite chore.
It really is.
People always put things back in the wrong spot, and
Yeah.
and then I have to go hunting, so I know that's kind of payback, right?
See, that goes to what you said earlier, though. You are the one who knows where everything goes. That's why you know where to find things, and none of the rest of us do. So you're very particular about things being in the right place.
Not even that particular, but it's like I don't.
You're pretty particular. Before we go, I have to give a shout out to a listener. Her name is Olivia Rodrigo. So I don't know for sure that she is a listener, but I was talking to my friend Dave the other day, and he said that he heard that Olivia Rodrigo listens to true crime podcasts to relax. So I can only assume she listens to us. So
well, then I need to give a shout out to my best friend, Jennifer Garner. Thanks for listening, Jen.
Yeah.
We love you.
Well, I wanted to tell Olivia, if you are listening, just if you could give us a shout out on your social media or something, that would help us out a lot. So that would be cool.
You are so strategic. You are a marketing genius,
Well,
sir.
I hear that she has a lot of
You're
followers
going to catch on
as
like
well.
wildfire now.
Yeah, we have a lot of followers. She does too. So it's a good exchange of shout outs.
I'm sure it's very similar. I'm sure we're
Right.
really going to boost her career.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
thanks.
know she needs some help there.
Yes. Well, thank you all so much for listening. We really
We
appreciate it.
appreciate all of you, not just celebrities.
Right.
So you're all celebrities to us.
Yes, you are.
We really do love hearing from you guys on, especially like if you're listening on Spotify. I love that new comment section. So leave us a comment. Please follow, subscribe, like, or find us on social media. Send us an email at lovemarykill@gmail.com. Until next time.
Don't kill your wife.
And don't kill your husband.